Hey guys, so I come to you with a bit of a chatty, casual, sort of kind of impromptu video. I just wanted to sort of unwind on this Thursday. I have not really had, I have not had a week that has been busy enough for me to feel as tired as I feel right now. But my week was sort of bookended by a significant event that has made me very tired. Nothing dramatic, but just... Anyway, just a lot was sort of thrown at me at the last minute, and that's always kind of exhausting, so I kind of feel like I've run a mile, even though I have not done a lick of physical activity today. So I thought I would just sit down and do a really casual video, and basically what I want to do is go through a bunch of the books on my shelf that are nonfiction that I'm really eager to get to, that I just looked at my shelf yesterday and thought to myself, which of these nonfiction books am I like most excited about? Which ones do I look at and just think that's a book that I have wanted to read for a long time, that I'm really eager to get to, that will be a lot of fun, or that I'll find super interesting. And I grabbed them and I made a gigantic pile of them, and if you follow me on Instagram you might have seen that pile. It is ungodly huge. But I'm not going to say too much about either one, any one of them, because it's, you know, I haven't read any of them, but I just wanted to go through them and sort of just enthuse about each of them. So I will just jump right into that. So the first one is Dry, a memoir. This is by Augusten Burroughs, and this is about his time struggling with alcoholism and recovering from that. And I bought this on a whim at the Goodwill, mostly because it's about alcoholism, because that is a condition that I've been very interested in for some time, ever since I read Mary Karr's memoir, Lit, where she talks about her time struggling as an alcoholic. But I haven't read that much about alcoholism since then, so I thought this might be interesting. And Augusten Burroughs, I think, is a comedian, and so it's supposed to take a sort of comic view of his life, so, and I like sort of tragicomic stories, so I'm hoping to like that. Next is a book that I have read more than half of already, but that I absolutely want to finish by the end of the year. It's Emerson's Essays, first and second series. Yeah, Ralph Waldo Emerson is the source of a lot of important American ideas, and he articulated those very American ideas in their best form, I think. A lot of the ideas that he puts forth in this book, I feel like, have gone on to become very ugly in a sort of bastardized form, especially in contemporary America. But he articulated them in their best form, and in their best form they are important and interesting, even if maybe you don't agree with all of them. And the writing in this is just absolutely gorgeous. So, yeah, one that I want to finish before the end of the year. Next, another classic. This is The Interpretation of Dreams by Sigmund Freud. So, yeah, I've mentioned my interest in Freud on this channel. I'm interested in him mostly because of his influence on the arts, on literature, and, you know, painting, photography, etc. But I think he also had a lot of important ideas about psychology, even though most of them haven't really stood up to scrutiny. And so I definitely want to read this, and it's one that I wanted to read for a long time. Again, that's going to be a common theme in this pile. A lot of nonfiction books that I have wanted to read for a long time, but just haven't, you know, sat down and made the time for, so, yeah. Next is a book that I will be reading very soon. This is a book I'm going to have to read because I'm writing a review of it for Open Letters Review, and it was sent to me by Steve Donahue. This is Ingenious, The Unintended Consequences of Human Innovation by Peter Gluckman and Mark Hansen. This is about how advancing technology and a lot of the comforts that we associate with the modern world, comforts is kind of an ironic way of referring to them, because what this is about is how those can be detrimental to humans' physical and psychological well-being. And I've just paged around in it a little bit. I haven't started reading it yet, but I've just I read page 112, I've looked at the notes a little bit. It seems like it's going to be a very omnivorous book, like it's going to talk about evolution and obviously psychology, history, obviously technology, So I think it should be a really interesting book. So I will be reading this in the coming weeks, because the release date is like October 17th, and if I want to write a review of it, I don't want it to be published too long after that, so I'll be reading this soon. Next, we have two big ones. This is Don't Know Much About the Bible by Kenneth Davis. This is just sort of a romp through the whole Bible. He has a chapter on every book, and he'll summarize what happens in the book if there's actual action. If there's not action, he'll just talk about what the book is about, what the main themes of it are. And when there is action, he'll talk about the main themes of the action and the sort of lessons you're supposed to glean from those events. And he also, I know, quotes judiciously from the Bible. And I've read one other book by Kenneth Davis, which was a history book about the early history of the United States in the 19th century, and I thought it was incredibly readable, really fun. So I'm hoping that this will be fun, just sort of a fun romp through the Bible, and hopefully a kick in the butt to get to rereading the Bible, because I read the Bible a long time ago. There are parts of it that I read many times, parts of it that I love dearly, but there are also parts of it that I haven't read in years, so hopefully this will be a kick in the butt to reread some of those parts that I haven't read in a long time. And we have a biography as the next one. This is Anne Sexton by Diane Middlebrook. So yeah, I love Anne Sexton's poetry, so it's only natural that I would go to a biography of her. I am developing a taste for literary biographies. This has been the year of my realizing that biographies can be a ton of fun. And this one is relatively short. It's not even 500 pages, which is really short as biographies go. So I think I will really find this very interesting when I get to it. Alright, the next one is the one that I'm currently working on already. It's Why I Read by Wendy Lesser. And this is just about the pleasure of reading, basically. She talks about character, plot, she talks about nonfiction, essays, poetry, all sorts of stuff. And I'm only about 30 pages in, and I absolutely love it so far. Just very quotable, insightful, and enjoyable, and easy to read. So I'm liking this, and I hope I can report back on it. Alright, we have a big one, this next one. This is one that I had on my must-read shelf at the beginning of this year, and which, again, is just one of those ones that I haven't gotten around to, but I think I will love it. It's, The Ancestor's Tale by Richard Dawkins and Yan Wang. And what this does, it sounds absolutely fascinating. It starts with modern-day humans, and it moves backward through evolution, all the way to the dawn of life on Earth. And that just sounds right up my alley. I love learning about evolution and genetics and all that sort of thing. So I think I will love this. I just need to make time for it because it's a huge book. Alright, we got two memoirs coming up next. This is A Literary Life by Larry McMurtry, which is about his life as a writer. I love memoirs of writers, and so I think I will like this. I read one of Larry McMurtry's other memoirs this year, Roads, which was about a big road trip, and I obviously love Lonesome Dove, so I am looking forward to reading this. And the next memoir is Teacher Man by Frank McCourt. I have read his two other memoirs and love them both, and again, just another book that I haven't quite made the time for, but can't wait to get to. And the next one, completely different. This is The Spectrum of Hope, an optimistic and new approach to Alzheimer's disease and other dementias by Gayatri Devi. This is this is one that I actually have read part of. I've read about 40 pages into it. And it's essentially a series of case studies of people with Alzheimer's whom Gayatri Devi has worked with. And she tries to take a kind of optimistic approach to it, as the title would suggest, and actually talks about some success stories, to the extent that you can have a success story with an illness like Alzheimer's or dementia. She talks about some cases where people have gone through treatment and actually improved. Yeah, anyway, just a kind of a hopeful take on the subject, which I think is kind of important, because it's easy to fall into despair when talking about Alzheimer's. Alright, going back to books that I have wanted to read for a very long time, this is On the Nature of Things by Lucretius, which is not an epic poem, but a long sort of philosophical poem where Lucretius sort of tries to put forth a kind of comprehensive theory of how the world works, is the sense I get. He discusses a lot of philosophical ideas taken from the Stoic school, which was popular in Roman times, and that just sounds right up my alley. I have heard that this book contains a sort of primitive idea of the theory of evolution in it, which may just be modern readers reading something into an ancient text that the author didn't intend, which I could totally see, but I'm still interested in it for that reason, for having heard of that. Next is On Photography by Susan Sontag, her book about photography, and sort of how we perceive images. Obviously Susan Sontag is one of my favorite writers, and I want to read more by her, and this is a classic. This is essentially a modern classic of hers, so yeah, looking forward to getting to that. This next one is kind of a nostalgic pick. This is The Grand Tetons by Margaret Sanborn. This is just a history of the Teton Range, starting in prehistory, how they developed, and going all the way through the present day, and the formation of Grand Teton National Park. I spent 5 days in Grand Teton National Park with my mom, and absolutely loved it. I think back to those days all the time. I posted some videos about my time in Grand Teton National Park, and I go back and rewatch them still sometimes, just to relive that week I was there. And it's just great to be able to read a book and sort of be back in a world that you miss. And this is a book too that I got about 50 pages into, just haven't made the time to finish. Next one is a buddy read. This is The Battle for God, A History of Fundamentalism by Karen Armstrong. I'm going to be buddy reading this with Britta Bowler, and this is the story of how religious fundamentalism developed, which is different from, I think, what most people would think of how religious fundamentalism developed. I think most people think of it as a sort of return to some sort of primitive state of religion, where these people are instituting these strict laws based on whatever religious scripture they follow, that are supposed to reestablish some old order that they think has existed in the past, some old religious order that has existed. And so it can be easy to think of it as a sort of imposition of old-fashioned ideas onto the modern world. But actually what Karen Armstrong argues is that it's actually a very modern phenomenon, religious fundamentalism. It's very much a product of the modern world, and the mentality of religious fundamentalists today is not really all that similar to the mentality of religious people from the Middle Ages and before. And actually she argues in this book as well, I know this because I read about a third of it one time way back. She argues actually that religious fundamentalism and science developed in tandem, and that they sort of mutually influenced each other in some interesting ways. So anyway, I'm really looking forward to that. That should be a really interesting buddy read. And this next one is another memoir, Reading Lolita in Tehran by Azar Nafisi, in which she tells the story of a book club that she began with a number of other women in the Islamic Republic of Iran during the most repressive years of the Islamic Republic. And she tells the story of her and these other women starting a book club where they read a bunch of banned literature, essentially. A lot of it Western literature. But one of the banned books was Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. And I'm just interested in this because I think Iran is a fascinating country, and I would like to learn more about it. And I think that this will satisfy that urge, and also satisfy my urge for books about books. Yet another book that I started earlier in the year and got about halfway through and just haven't made time to finish. This is A Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. This is one of the greatest works of nature writing ever. I read to about that point, right there. And just some gorgeous prose, some just beautiful writing. And the first sort of half of it is about just sort of musings on nature and the land and humans' relationship to the land, and descriptions of Sand County, Wisconsin, which was an area in Wisconsin where Aldo Leopold had a cabin where he lived for much of the year. And again, just beautiful descriptions of the natural world in that area. The last part of this book I know becomes a bit more philosophical, about a sort of land ethics, I think it's called, and how we should treat the land. And this is also a very important text in the development of the environmental movement. So, yeah, and I definitely want to finish it. Next is On the Origin of Species by Richard Dawkins. I will hopefully be reading this in Nonfiction November because Steve Donahue is hosting a read-along of it, and it's a book that I wanted to read forever because I'm just fascinated by evolution and genetics, as I've already said. And yeah, I have heard that this book can get a little tedious. He talks, I know, a lot about, finches and dogs, but I don't think that'll matter for me. I have no problem with somewhat boring books if they are interesting to me, and I am really interested in evolution, so I think I will like this. These next two are poetry books. This is The Sounds of Poetry by Robert Pinsky. This is a really slim, just discussion of the craft of poetry, and I love books like this. I know that I will gobble it up, especially since it's so thin, and I did read like 15 pages of it earlier this year. And I really like Robert Pinsky's poetry, so I really need to get to that. And the next one is a poetry notebook by Clive James, and the subtitle is Reflections on the Intensity of Language. And this is more just a collection of essays on poetry. So there are essays, just a sampling from the table of contents. We have Listening to the Flavor, 5 Favorite Poetry Books, The Arrow Has Not 2 Points, Little Low Heavens, On a Second Reading, Poetry Archive Tour. So yeah, just a series of musings on the art of poetry, which is another kind of book that I just gobble up, so I can't wait to get to that. These last several, we return to the genre of either biography or memoir. This is The 12 Caesars by Suetonius, another classic of Rome. You will not get through one of my videos without hearing about the classics of Greece and Rome, because that's just how I am. So this is a series of really short biographies of some of the most influential rulers of the Roman Empire, and I've heard that it's really not really reliable as a work of history, but that it's really entertaining to read. So that's mostly what I'm interested in it for. But I also feel like, he couldn't have fabricated everything in here, and there are also notes in the back, which I hope will do some explaining of the inaccuracies and such. So I do also hope to actually learn about the Roman history from this. But again, another book that I have wanted to read for so long and just haven't gotten around to. So anyway. And then we have The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion, which is a memoir of the time after her husband died very suddenly, and just her dealing with the grief over that devastating tragedy. And this is yet another book where I read the first 30 pages and thought that the writing was just gorgeous. I loved it. So really looking forward to getting to that. And we go back to Rome. This is The Civil War by Julius Caesar. That Julius Caesar. This is a sort of memoir, sort of his own historical account of the civil war that he fought with Pompeius Magnus for domination of the Roman Republic, which was about to become the Roman Empire. And I read Caesar's commentaries on the Gallic Wars earlier this year, and liked it, I have to say. I liked it as a book, even though the events being reported in it were incredibly horrifying. He committed horrible atrocities in the Gallic Wars, but he was a really good writer, and he wrote a really great book in that one. So I would like to read this as well. And I'm sure I will feel that same sort of conflicted feeling over, liking the book, but also, being totally revolted at the subject matter and at the author as a person. So, anyway, but it is a book that I wanted to read for quite some time. And then we have Infidel by Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and this is another memoir of her growing up in Somalia, I believe, in a society where female circumcision is very widely practiced, and it's about her experience in that sort of society that was very repressive toward women, and escaping and fleeing to the Netherlands and becoming a politician in the Netherlands. Yeah, I know she is someone who I've heard some about her views on religion, and I very much disagree with a lot of her views, but I think her story sounds very interesting, and I think it's important to read books by people you disagree with anyway, so it'll be hopefully interesting in that regard as well. So, And then lastly is a book for, or no, sorry, we have one more after this, but the next one is a book that's for another read-along, Nothing to be Frightened of by Julian Barnes, which is kind of a memoir, kind of just a meditation on death and the fear of death, and how we go about thinking about death. And I'm going to be reading this for Jason at Old Boots Chapter and Verses Mortality Project that he's been doing, where he reads books and watches films that deal with the subject of death. And I thought this book just sounded really interesting, so I will be joining him for this. And lastly, we have one last memoir. This is An Unquiet Mind by K. Redfield Jamison. The subtitle is A Memoir of Moods and Madness. And this is about K. Redfield Jamison's life struggling with bipolar disorder. She herself is a psychologist who studies bipolar disorder, but she herself has also struggled with bipolar disorder for years. And this just tells her story. Yeah, again, another book, this is a common theme, another book I have wanted to read forever. So maybe this year's Nonfiction November will have to be one where I really like buckle down and just get through some of these books that I have like a quarter read or half read, and books that I have wanted to read for just ever and just, you know, haven't made the time for. You know, when we say we haven't gotten around to a book, we come up with excuses, but I think usually it really just comes down to not making the time. You know, I include myself absolutely in that assessment. So, we will see, though. We will see. You know, obviously there's a ton of books, so I'm not going to be able to read them all for Nonfiction November. But, this is kind of the stack from which I hope to pull my Nonfiction November TBR, I hope. So, anyway, you will all be hearing about how many of these books or which of these books I read. If you have read any of them or want to read any of them, or just have any general thoughts, let me know in the comments. I hope you're all having a good week, and I hope you all go on to have a good weekend, and I will talk to you all in my next video. Bye, guys.